Good morning, students. So, we are back to the lecture on history of Indian cinema. In the last classes, we were discussing the Indian cinema during 1930s and 40s. So, in this class, I wish to explore a bit more about the Indian cinema during 1930s and 40s. I thought that I will give you some more aspects of Indian cinema during 1930s and 40s. So we have discussed all these things. It is the era of sound. Silent era ends with Alam Ara, which comes out in 1931. And we have the rise of all those regional cinemas. We saw the rapid changes in technology and stylistics in Indian cinema. We looked into the details of Indian cinema during 1930s, how it transformed, how sound transformed Indian cinema. And then we looked into the other trends in the 1930s, how they had this fascination towards social themes. We have Shantaram with Dunya Na Mane. We have a set of filmmakers who believed that cinema can be an instrument to bring about a social change. So they used cinema as a medium to expose all those ill practices, evil practices in the society. And also in 1930s, we discussed the emergence of studios, established studios. So we have Bombay Talkies, Prabhat Studio and New Theatres. And later we talked about the interplay between tradition and modernity, how there was this juxtaposition of both modernity and traditional elements in Indian cinema. We talked about the films produced by Vadya Movie Tone, in which we see the presentation of Fearless Nadia. And I thought that I will elaborate a little more about the studio era. So, we talked about three major studios here. One was Prabhat Film Studio, the other was New Theatres, and the third one was Bombay Talkies. So I thought I will give you little more explanation about these studios which changed the face of Indian cinema. So it should be said that film production in 1920s and 30s were actually organized along lines similar to Hollywood. So in Hollywood we see that a studio bore the entire cost of a film's production and had technicians and actors as full time contracted employees. Studios in Hollywood became known for specializing in specific genre of films. So now Indian studio system too followed the lines similar to Hollywood. So they started bearing the cost of film production and they had technicians and actors as full time contracted employees. But We should say that unlike Hollywood, a handful of studios did not succeed in monopolizing the film business, and the majority of Indian studios did not control distribution and exhibition like their Hollywood counterparts. So the Hollywood studios had control over distribution even distribution and exhibition were under the control of Hollywood studios. So there was this lack of integration between production, distribution, and exhibition. Indian studios had control only over film production, while Hollywood studios had control over film production, distribution, and exhibition. So there was this lack of integration between production, distribution, and exhibition, which accounted for the decline of studios, where there was a series of commercial failures and it ultimately led to bankruptcy. So, what is referred to as studio era was actually a short chapter in the history of Indian cinema. So, we have four important studios. One is Imperial Films Company, it was in Bombay. Prabhat Film Company, it was in Pune. New Theatres in Calcutta, and Bombay Talkies. While Imperial Film Companies was actually significant for its efforts at technological innovations, the other three, Prabhat Film Company, New Theatres, and Bombay Talkies, played an important role in training some of the important directors and actors of the 1950s and 60s, thus laying the foundation for post independence Hindi cinema. So, the first one is Imperial Films Company. So, when we talk about established studio, we usually avoid Imperial Films Company, which was only there for a short period. But it is, as I said earlier, it is noted for all those technological innovations it brought out. So this studio was established by Ardesh Rivani in 1928, and it functioned until 1938. And this Imperial Film Company was organized as a vertically integrated with its own exhibition infrastructure, and it was closely associated with this costumed historical genre, that is Alam Ara. It was Imperial Film Companies and also India's first sound feature. It was a period fantasy based on a popular Parsi theatre play about a young girl named Alam Ara who exposes an evil queen's schemes and saves a kingdom. India's top two stars from the silent era, that is Sulojana and Subeda, were actually under contract with the Imperial Films Company, as was a young Prithviraj Kapoor, who would become one of the stars of pre-independence Hindi cinema. and literally established an acting dynasty of Kapoor family. Many of these films produced by Imperial Film Company were actually remake of its own silent hits. Imperial made films in at least, it is said that, in 9 languages: Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Malay, Burmese, and Pashto. In 1929, it became the first studio in India to shoot scenes at night using incandescent lights. And it was the first studio to produce indigenously processed color film. That was our first color film, Kisan Kanya, in the year 1937. Imperial also produced the first Farsi language sound feature in 1933. That was Dukatar Elur. And thus an aspect of Iranian film history can be traced to Bombay. Next studio, it is Prabhat Film Company. It was established in 1929 in southwestern Maharashtrian town of Kolhapur as a partnership between 5 individuals who had previously worked together in Maharashtra Film Company. And later, Prabhat Film Company moved to Pune, the second largest city in Maharashtra, in 1933, where it became West India's Western India's premier studio with a national reputation. Prabhat had many stars on its payroll, had its own processing labs, well equipped sound and editing departments, the largest stage floor in India, and an art department regarded as the country's best. Its style of filmmaking was influenced by the popular Marathi musical theatre tradition known as Sangeet Nadak, and many of its early films were remakes of Maharashtrian film repertoire. Prabhat had its first major hit with Amrut Mandan, which came out in the year 1934, which was directed by V. Shandara, who actually became one of the most celebrated Indian directors in the 1930s. It was a strongly political film about a people's revolt set against a backdrop of a kingdom where the conflict is between a rationalist king and a ritualistic priest. The studio also pioneered new successful genres such as sane films. Sane films are actually all those biographical films about popular poet saints from the 16th and 17th century. So we have this Sant Tukaram, which is revered as a great Indian film. It was actually the first Indian film to receive international recognition. It was adjudged one of the three best films of the world at Venice Film Festival. It was actually a runaway success and broke the box office records by being the first Indian film to run in a single theater for more than a year. And it became the archetype for devotional films. So I will show you a clip on this particular film.
आनिक मदनाई आता आनिक निमिलिया चित्ता पानिया पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग मनी पांडुरंग जानी जागृति स्वप्नी पांडुरंग पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग मनी पांडुरंग जानी पडिले वळण इंद्रिया सकला पडिले वळण इंद्रिया सकला भाव तो निराळा निराळा भाव तो निराळा नाही तुझा पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग जानी पांडुरंग बने पांडुरंग जाने तुका म्हणे नेत्री केली ओळखण तुका म्हणे नेत्री
So that's a clip on Sant Tukara. So it was Prabhat Film Company which started with all those same films. And Prabhat's success was also due to good distribution arrangements and long-term contract they had with exhibitors. It eventually took on distribution itself and built its own theatres in Bombay, Pune, and Madras. Later, Prabhat Talkies lost its premier director, V. Shantaram, in 1942. So he broke away from Prabhat Film Company and he started his own studio in Bombay. Though Prabhat Film Company continued producing films even after the departure of V. Shantaram, the studio finally closed in 1953. And I have mentioned it earlier that its premises now form the campus of Film and Television Institute of India. The other studio, it is the other regional studio with a national reputation. It is New Theatres. It was founded by B.N. Sarkar in 1931. Unlike Imperial and Prabhat studios, which produced silent films prior to their changeover to sound films, New Theatre from its inception was a sound studio. It was the most elite of Bengal studios and as such attracted significant technical and creative talent from several smaller silent studios which was which were on the brink of bankruptcy. Many of the films made by this studio was based on Bengali novels and the studio aimed for the cinematic equivalent of literature. Whereas the other studios usually only hired one director, New Theatres had many directors as well as the major star of the 1930s, that is Kundan Lal Saigal. It is 1930s, I made a mistake, it is not 1939s, it is 1930s. It also invested considerably in technological innovations, and the technique of playback singing was first introduced by the studio in 1935 in the film Dhoop Chand, Sunlight Shadow. One of the studio's most significant film was Devdas, P.C. Barwas Devdas, which was made both in Bengali and Hindi. But once its key director, that is, he was Nitin Bose, he resigned in 1941 and New Theatre's success started to decline. Since the studio never established its own distribution outlets, the rise of markets in western and southern India actually quickened its decline. And at the end, New Theatres sold many of its film rights to distributors at a loss and was finally closed in 1955. Fourth theatre, it is Bombay Talkies. It was among the largest pre-World War second sound studios in India, and introduced some of the major stars and directors who became the face of post-independence Hindi cinema. They were Devanand, Raj Kapoor, Ashok Kumar, Dilip Kumar. Bombay Talkies was founded by Himanshu Rai in 1934, and it was the only major studio established as a full-fledged corporate body with a board of directors that included prominent business leaders of Bombay. It was one of the first studios with backing from major financial institutions, paying a regular dividend to shareholders from its third year onwards. And Himanshu Rai was also involved in successful Indo-German co-productions during the silent era, and much of the studio's early technical team, like director, cameraman, set designer, sound engineers, they were all imported from Germany. After Himanshu Rai's death, his wife Devika Rani took over as the production controller. And the studio produced one of the biggest hits of the pre-independence era, that is Kismet, which came out in 1943. So it was a crime thriller about a pickpocket being united with his long lost family. So it was one of the super hit films, biggest hits in the pre-independence era. So we will have a look at a song from Kismet. I have actually discussed this song when I talked about 1940s cinema in the last class.
हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है। दूर हटो दूर हटो दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है। दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है।
ताजमहल है और कुतुब मीनारा है,
जहाँ हमारा ताजमहल है और कुतुब मीनारा है।
जहाँ हमारे मंदिर मस्जिद सिखों का गुरुद्वारा है,
जहाँ हमारे मंदिर मस्जिद सिखों का गुरुद्वारा है। जहाँ हमारा ताजमहल है और कुतुब मीनारा है, जहाँ हमारे मंदिर मस्जिद सिखों का गुरुद्वारा है।
धरती पर कदम बढ़ाना अत्याचार तुम्हारा है,
अत्याचार तुम्हारा है। दूर हटो दूर हटो दूर हटो वालों, हिंदुस्तान है। दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है। आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, दूर हटो, दूर हटो, दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है। शुरू हुआ है जंग तुम्हारा, जाग उठो हिंदुस्तानी, तुम न किसी के आगे झुकना, जर्मन हो या जापानी। शुरू हुआ है जंग तुम्हारा, जाग उठो हिंदुस्तानी, तुम न किसी के आगे झुकना, जर्मन हो या जापानी। आज सभी के लिए हमारा यही कौमी नारा है, आज सभी के लिए हमारा यही कौमी नारा है। दूर हटो, दूर हटो, दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है, दूर हटो है दुनिया वालों, हिंदुस्तान हमारा है। आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, आज हिमालय की चोटी से फिर हमने ललकारा है, दूर हटो, दूर हटो, दूर हटो।
So that was the biggest hit of pre-independence era. I have discussed the same film in the last class too, when we talked about 1940s, all those war films, all those censorship. I will deal it in a little more detailed manner. So coming back to Bombay Talkies. So after this biggest hit, Kismet, Bombay Talkies was dealt with a blow when some of its most successful members, including the star, director, and producer of Kismet, broke away from the studio to form another studio, which is Filmistan. Along with that, Devika Rani retired from filmmaking in 1945, and by the early 1950s, the studio went to decline. Though its workers' association tried to save it, Bombay Talkies produced its last film in 1954. We have two more noteworthy studios based in Bombay. One was Ranjit Movie Tone, the other one was Madhya Movie Tone. Ranjit Movie Tone was established in 1929 by Chandulal Shah and stayed active until the late 1960s. It was best known in its early years for mid-budget socials, satires, and stunt-derived mythologicals. The studio flourished in the early sound era with an assembly line approach to production and was India's biggest producer of films until the 1950s. Vadya Movie Tone was founded by JBH Vadya and Homi Vadya. Vadya Movie Tone, I have discussed Vadya Movie Tone when I talked about Fearless Nadia phenomenon. So, Vadya Movie Tone was most famous for its stunt or action films starring this Nadia. So, she was actually a Australian born former circus performer of mixed Welsh Greek parentage. Her real name was Mary Evans. And Vadya Movie Tone sold their studio premises to Shantaram in 1942 who converted them to Raj Kamal Kala Mandir. So I hope you got an idea about the studio era, the major studios, how it laid a strong foundation for Indian film industry. Now we move to the rest of 1940s. We have discussed all these things in the last class too. It's only that I have added a bit more to the previous PowerPoint. So we have discussed all these things. We have placed 1940s as the decade of unrest, struggle and hope. When there was a Second World War, there was this shortage of film reels. Along with that, it was also a turbulent period which witnessed considerable social and political changes with increasing urbanization, social changes, modernization, and rise of capitalism. And there was this fervent nationalistic struggles in the background. We have talked about rationing of films by British and how there was this strong censorship of political contents in the films and how these directors started using mythology to narrate political struggle in actually a coded language which could be understood only by the Indian audience. So it was, as I said earlier, that it was something like patriotism in disguise. So that is where we discussed these films like Kismet, the song Dur Hato. So that song actually warns Germans and Japanese soldiers to stay clear of India. But as an Indian audience, we understood that the song meant a message to all those British soldiers too. It is said that that film was huge success and all thanks goes to that single song, and it is said that that film with that single song for that single song ran for nearly 3.5 years in Calcutta. We have discussed all these things and we have discussed how by 40s Indian film became completely indigenized. The apparatus of filmmaking machine became indigenized with Indian ethos, and we saw the rise of playback singers. They attained star status and the emergence of great stars like Devanand, Raj Kapoor. We discussed impact of World War on Indian cinema, how British forced India to join World War II, and along with that, a film advisory board was set up in 1940 by the colonial government and granted a monopoly over the distribution of raw film stock. It was also this period where, as I said earlier, the colonial government started intensifying its censorship of films, which appeared to support the Indian independence movement either through words or images. So there was this strong censorship of films which contained political themes. So in 1940s, the policing of Indian cinema grew more stringent. Out of 1,774 films seen by Bombay censors in 1943, 25 required modification before they could be released, and that number went to 464 out of 3,099 by 1948. Along with that, there was this shortage of film stocks, and priority was given to films supporting the war efforts, resulting in an abundance of war movies. And it also led to illegal an influx of all those wartime profits in films actually led to black marketing. It is said that all those wartime shortages in basic goods and commodities led to the thriving black market, and all these war profiteers increasingly laundered their illegal earnings by investing in film production. As a result, the budgets actually, it is said that it has skyrocketed, as same was with the salaries of the stars, which all these studios couldn't match. And as I said earlier, they went into bankruptcy, and gradually studios went out of business. It was during this period we see the rise of independent producers. So it is said that the influx of wartime profits is the single most important factor in the rapid decline of studios and the rise of independent producers, which is actually the dominant characteristics of the Bombay film industry even today. And the impact of partition on Indian cinema. So, till then, we had film producing centers in Pakistan. That was once the undivided India. So we had a film producing center in Lahore. So with partition, this film producing center, Lahore Film Producing Center, crumbled, and producers and directors, all those Hindu producers and directors, great directors like Yash Chopra, they all moved to Bombay. Along with that, after the partition, a part of Bengal went to now Bangladesh. So Calcutta's dominance also weakened, and market for Bengali cinema also got cut down. And another impact was the predominance of ethnic Punjabis in Bombay, which is also a result of partition. So it is said that Hindi film industry actually benefited from the weakening of the above industries and from the influx of people leaving Pakistan to come to cities like Bombay and Delhi. The post-independence Bombay film industries shaped, it is said that shaped by the histories of migration and displacement set in motion by partition. Many of the prominent actors, producers, directors, and technicians either migrated to Bombay from Pakistan or are descendants of those who did. And another impact of partition upon filmmaking is that the Bombay industry became one of the few sites in India where the Urdu language was kept alive. While Urdu is a language that originated and is spoken in northern India, the present day state of Uttar Pradesh, it became, as you know, it became the official language of Pakistan. So, due to all those political tensions between India and Pakistan and the association of Urdu with Muslims, a process was actually initiated by British in the 19th century, where this Urdu literature and scholarship in India suffered a major setback. It was replaced by highly Sanskritized Hindi. But we should say that Hindi films are the ones who continued to make or continued using Urdu and kept it alive. So Hindi films continued making films in Hindustani, and many prominent Urdu poets worked as lyricists within the Bombay film industry. So it is hard to imagine film songs or dialogues without the Urdu vocabulary or metaphors or idioms. All these things, all these patterns derived from Urdu language and literature. So we have words for love like pyar, ishq, mohabbat, heart, this dil, law, it is kanun, justice, insaf, honor, izzat, duty, farz, blood, hoon, emotion, jasbat, crime, jurum, and wealth, daulat. All central concepts in Hindi cinema are from Urdu's Persian and Arabic derived vocabulary. So Bollywood sustained Urdu, and later we understand that Bombay based industry slowly became the national cinema. And all those films had this winning formula, the usage of songs, dance, spectacles, and fantasy. We have all those new directors, Bimal Roy, Ishanta Ram, Mehboob Khan, Gurudutt, K. Abbas. So, why Bombay cinema emerged as Indian cinema, as national cinema? Why Bombay cinema, Bollywood? It is considered to be, when you study about history of Indian cinema, you are basically talking about cinema which happened in Bombay. So why is it like that? There are films from different parts of India, and they didn't get the status of national cinema. Why? These are the reasons. With 1940s, all those most dominant regional films lost its market. Punjabi, Bengali films all lost their market. And with partition, all those film talents and production houses moved to Bombay from different parts of India. And the winning formula of song, dance, spectacle, it also helped in creating a status for Bombay cinema as national cinema. Along with that, you should understand the Hindi used in all those Bollywood films, Bombay cinemas. It is actually a pidgin language. What is pidgin language? It is actually a hybrid transactional language understood by different linguistic communities. Remember, you should remember that if Bombay had to be linguistically placed, it would have been Marathi or Gujarati. What the common Bombaywalas speak is Marathi or Gujarati. Hindi is only a pidgin language, a language which is shared by communities just for transactions. It emerged as a transactional language. So it was with Bombay cinema, Hindi emerged as the as the national came into the national picture. And along with that, Bombay cinema almost had a universal appeal even in non-Hindi states. Even though Hindi cinema had no roots, Hindi language and Hindi film had no roots, but it garnered a kind of a universal appeal even in non-Hindi states, and it could get the attention of pan-Indian audience. So these are the reasons why Bombay cinema emerged as national cinema. It become it becomes the face of Indian cinema. So I'm right now concluding my lecture on Indian cinema in 1930s and 40s. I hope I have covered all the aspects of 1930s and 40s. In the last class, I felt like I missed some of the points. So I have incorporated all those points. I have discussed studio era in detail and 1940s, how all those social unrest, all those turbulence changed the face of Indian cinema. So I hope you have understood all these things. And if you have any doubts, I constantly repeat, if you have any doubts, please feel free to contact me. So thank you, girls. Have a nice day.